Assisted dying is one step closer to becoming legal in England and Wales after MPs backed the bill in a historic vote. The vote followed 4.5 hours of debate with 330 MPs voting in favour and 275 opposing. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, was one of the key people voting in favour alongside the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. The legislation would mean terminally ill adults with 6 months left to live are able to request assistance in ending their life. That's the basics of this story, isn't it? But as with all these stories, there is so much more to it. So let's see what my panel make of this. Parliamentary sketch writer at The Telegraph, Madeline Grant, and founder of Turn Left Media. That's what it says on the tin, I suspect, there. Curtis. You
are quite correct.
Thank you. I thought it might do. Thank you very much. So, we have two, right and left on this. But the one thing about this debate, both of you, is it wasn't divided between right and left, was it? Coming to you first, Madeline. It was divided between your personal choice. So you had the weird situation of sort of like people like Rachel Reeves and agreeing with someone the polar opposite to her, and Nigel Farage agreeing with people on the far left. MPs were allowed to vote on their personal reaction rather than their politics. But it was interesting to see who voted and how they voted.
Well, I don't think it was an apolitical decision. I agree it doesn't fall into simple categories of left and right. I think it was essentially the unfettered Liberals of Labour and the Conservative Party who voted for this. But I think there was a bit of a right and left shift in the sense that there was... the Lib Dems overwhelmingly voted for it. The new intake of Labour MPs overwhelmingly voted for it. But I think only 1 in 5 Tory MPs voted for it. And surprisingly, for me at least, more than half of the Reform MPs voted for this as well. So it is complicated. But I think that I saw a bit of a pattern emerging. MPs, often those who have, frankly, some of the poorer constituencies where they are, I think, more aware of the vulnerabilities, more ethnic minority MPs voted against it. I think it was often the MPs of seats that are a bit more well-heeled, where their constituents... Perhaps they've heard from more constituents who view this as a matter of choice, and perhaps they've heard less from people who worry about the vulnerabilities and the risks of coercion. But for me, it was that point about liberalism of both parties.
What did you make of it, Curtis?
Well, just as we went live, we were discussing about how there was a vote in 2015. It got voted down. And in fact, one figure, Wes Streeting, voted in favour and today voted against. Where I disagree with you is the fact that this does actually feel quite apolitical. And I kind of get sick of politicians when they say, this thing isn't political, that thing isn't political. It's overplayed. But actually, in this specific instance, it does cross party and political, well, mostly political lines.
Yeah, I agree with that. I didn't say otherwise.
Yeah, sure. And for me, my personal position is I principally support assisted dying. I think the idea that those who are suffering are having to wait to get sort of a dignity in death. There's people I know who've had family go through this traumatic experience. However, I also have a practical approach. So we probably don't really disagree an awful lot here, because I don't think I would support this in practical sense. I want to touch upon what you said about coercion. I do think there are issues with safeguarding. I look at Canada, the maid system over there. It's a terrible, terrible situation where there is legit coercion. People are going through this route because they're seen as a burden on the state. And I absolutely think that's a really important point to talk about. But in terms of coercion, I would say actually the state isn't getting involved. They're actually backing away, because one could look at this and say, well, the state is mandating that I have to draw right at the end of my life in a very painful way. And actually, this is probably where the government sort of backs out. So we can go into where we disagree. I think principally, I think it's a good idea, but I don't know if I were to be, I wouldn't want to be a politician today to vote on it. I don't think I would vote for it, but I have respect on both sides, actually. I don't pass any judgment. Both sides have put across really good arguments.
Would you have voted for it out of interest, Madeline?
I would have voted it down. It would have been perhaps the thing I would feel most strongly about voting down. I think that this is
Why would you vote it down?
I think it's a terrible, terrible bill. I was disgusted, frankly disgusted. I'm sorry, I know we're meant to be jolly today, but I watched it all day yesterday, and I did not see anything that gave me much hope. I think what was truly unforgivable was the number of supporters of the bill who were saying things that were factually untrue about the bill that has such high stakes attached to it, than that they were urging their colleagues to vote for. Kim Leadbeater, in her speech, I think said sort of like 10 things that were factually wrong. So, for example, she said that no jurisdiction in the world that has begun with only people with a terminal diagnosis has ever expanded their criteria. It's a flat-out lie. This is exactly what happened in Canada.
Belgium,
Yes, well. Exactly. And this was just one of many either misunderstandings or outright lies. And frankly, Kim Leadbeater said so many things that were false that I just don't think you can say that this is plausible deniability. I think to have the audacity to want to impose something that could fundamentally changes the relationship between the state, the individual and mortality in this way, the least you should bloody well do is know your own bill and not say things that are false. She actually had to come to the chamber at the end of the day to correct the record because she had said something that was factually inaccurate about having the judiciary behind her. So I just think that alone is a good reason to be very suspicious and very worried about this bill, because if they make these basic mistakes at this stage and misrepresent it to people, then what hope does that give us that further down in the process they will be conciliatory and involving the people that need to be involved to get it right?
I do want to quickly comment about the judiciary, sorry. It is slightly different in our parliamentary system that the bill isn't just suddenly expanded. Any expansion or changes to the bill does have to go through Parliament. And that, of course, when something goes through Parliament, people vote on it, it causes a national debate like we're having today. So I wouldn't say it's quite as easy of, OK, we're just going to suddenly expand it. I think that's something we need to bear in mind. However, you are, again, correct in saying that there is an issue with this, not this particular bill, but the idea around assisted dying that worries me about those who are poor and disenfranchised. And I don't think it's the best idea to do it in the state of this country at the moment. I mean, at the moment, the NHS is being carved up to private profiteers, and they're making money off of our British health service. And I find that quite worrying, putting something like this, which is very, very delicate, through the state of our country, the state of our public services, and again, the fact that our public services are being carved up to the highest bidder, that worries me.